Hello wonderful human beings, Sheldon Evans here, and in today's video I'll be telling you guys why I moved from full frame to crop sensor, and then I'm going back to full frame, and there was this little stint with a mirrorless camera. Let's just jump into it. Yes, I bought a new camera again. But make sure you watch until the end of this video because there's actually a lot of useful information in here about crop sensor and full frame cameras and the differences between them. So stick around, it's not just me rambling about buying a new camera. Those of you who've been following me for a while on Instagram know that I used to shoot with a Canon 6D, which is an absolutely amazing camera. I love it to bits. And I'd say that about 90% of my portfolio on my website was shot on that camera. But I had that camera for such a long time that I clocked around 250,000 clicks on it. So it was getting time to get a new camera. And there was one feature that the 6D used to lack that I wish it had, which was autofocus during video. Especially since making these videos for you guys was becoming more of a full-time gig. So previously what I used to do was set up like a light pole or a stand or something, go behind the camera, focus the camera manually, make sure that it's in focus, go back, move it out of the way, and then sit still and try not to move and be sort of like a zombie and talk to the camera so that I don't move out of the field of focus. So at the time it made sense for me to ditch the 6D and get something like an 80D, which has autofocus during video and a swivel out screen, which I used to think was a bit of a gimmick, but it's proved very, very useful because I can see myself and I can frame my shot from in front of the camera, not keep moving behind and in front of the camera. And if you guys know anything about me, you'll know that I like working smarter and not harder. So anything that I can do to improve my life and make it a little bit easier and a little bit simpler, I won't even hesitate about moving in that direction. Now, if you're thinking why I downgrade from something like a 6D, which is a full frame camera, to an 80D, which is a crop sensor, instead of getting something like a 5D Mark IV, which is a better full frame camera, then here's why. I'll start off by saying that I used to shoot weddings, and if you know anything about weddings, you'll know that the work days are incredibly long and every extra gram of weight makes a difference, especially if you're shooting 2 weddings a weekend, which at the time I was. But Sheldon, you're young and fit and full of life, you shouldn't be worrying about this extra weight that you're carrying around. Well, let me tell you, I've been blessed with tiny, wrinkly, old man hands and the back of a 94-year-old. So even if I wasn't going to be shooting weddings in the future, even the thought of a slightly heavier camera would send pains down my back and my wrists and my forearms and the whole deal. Now, I know a lot of you guys are looking at me and thinking, well, if the weight is so important to you, then why didn't you just move to a mirrorless camera? Well, funny story about that. There was a stage when I had a little dance with a mirrorless camera and I wanted one so badly that I flew overseas to buy it, and that camera was the Sony a6500 because it wasn't available here at the time. So what happened to that camera if it's so great? Well, it produces stunning images, incredible video, and it shoots in 4K and slow motion, but I just didn't enjoy using it. And it's that simple. I just didn't enjoy using the camera. I know that I'm being pedantic, but I've spoken about this at length before, that I've put a lot more emphasis on the experience that I have while shooting with a camera over its technical capabilities. I'd much rather have fun and enjoy the experience that I'm having shooting with a camera rather than obsessing over which camera is sharper, which one has more megapixels, or whether or not it'll do your laundry. So that's why I've now moved to the Canon 6D Mark II, which is the camera that I'm using to shoot this now, because it's the perfect camera for me. It has everything that I need in a camera. It's like the 6D Mark I and the 80D had a child together, and this was born. It's got a swivel out screen, which I can see myself right now. It's got video autofocus. It's got 60 frames per second at 1080p, and it's full frame, which doesn't necessarily make it better. However, there are some advantages and disadvantages between full frame and crop sensor. So let's talk about those. First up is range versus wide angle. So as the name suggests, a crop sensor camera will crop the image in. So whichever lens you're using with the camera and whatever focal length it is not the effective focal length of that lens on a crop sensor camera. You have to multiply it by the crop factor of the camera. So let's use Canon for example. This is a 24 to 70mm f2.8 lens on a full frame camera, but the crop factor on Canon's APS-C size sensors is 1.6 times. So the effective focal length of this lens is about 38 to 114 millimeters, which is fantastic if you're looking for that extended range, because your images will be a little more zoomed in. So if you're doing something like shooting sports or events or even wildlife, getting that extra range out of your lenses is fantastic, especially on telephoto lenses. But if you like to take photo of architecture or interiors or landscapes where wider angle lenses make more sense, then you're better off using a full frame camera because you can take it advantage of those wider angles in your lenses. So if you're taking a photo of a building at 16mm, it's actually going to be at 16mm. Now you could argue that you can just buy wider angle lenses for your crop sensor camera, but what will start happening is that you'll start running into a lot more distortion and objects will appear a lot further than they are the wider you get. Next up is image quality and low light performance. And this is where things can start getting a little fuzzy. Because cameras are getting better day by day, that line between full frame and crop sensor image quality is getting blurred. We could argue over this, but in general, full frame cameras have slightly better image quality and low light performance than crop sensor cameras. That's not always the case, but in general. With full frame cameras, you get a little more dynamic range, which is the range between the highlights and the shadows in your image. And like me, I like to underexpose my images slightly so that I have more detail left in my highlights. Because if you blow out your highlights, that detail is unrecoverable. But if you underexpose your image slightly, it's a little bit easier to boost up your shadows in post-production. Now, another thing when it comes to the low light performance of your camera is the aperture of your lens. Like we spoke about before with the focal length, you have to multiply it by the crop factor of your camera. The same goes for the aperture of your lens to get the effective aperture of the lens on your crop sensor body. So again, let's use Canon as an example. This is a 24mm f2.8 lens, but if we take the crop factor into account, it's actually about a 38mm f4.5 lens. So you won't be getting as much of a blurry background or shallow depth of field as if you were to use the same lens on a full frame camera. Now this is an EFS lens, which means it's only for crop sensor cameras and it's made for crop sensor bodies. It won't even fit on full frame cameras. Now it would be nice if manufacturers included the effective focal length and effective aperture of these lenses either on the lens or on the box for people who don't know any better. So it's not entirely true saying that you can create the exact same images using both full frame and crop sensor, but you can handicap yourself on full frame to make those images look as if they were shot on crop sensor. So you might just be thinking, what if you get faster lenses with wider apertures? For example, Fuji makes a gorgeous piece of glass, the 56mm f1.2 lens. But even then, if you apply the crop factor of the Fuji camera, it's still only about an 85mm f1.8 lens, which can be beaten out by the Canon's 85 f1.2 lens. And Canon's 1.8 version of the lens is still about half the price of Fuji's lens. So I'll put up 3 different images in this video now. One shot on a crop sensor, one shot on a full frame, and one shot on a medium format, which is an even bigger sensor than a full frame camera, which essentially makes a full frame a crop of a medium format. Now, if you can immediately tell the difference between these 3 images off the bat and tell me which camera each of them were shot with, then it's simple that you have superpowers and I envy you, and you are the only person on the planet that can do that. But you can take a second to try and figure that out, and you can check if you're right. I'll put which camera I shot the images with in the description down below. Now there are a few tiny differences between full frame and crop sensor cameras that you might like bigger viewfinders in full frame cameras, a lot more crop sensor cameras have swivel out screens, but it comes down to one final thing, and that is preference and limiting factors. I've shot with pretty much every brand of camera and every camera you can imagine, and I keep coming back to Canon, and it's not because of brand loyalty or anything like that. There are definitely better options out there, but I personally just like using Canon cameras. I started off with Canon, I like the way it feels in my hands, I like the interface, I'm used to it, and in general it's just an all-around pleasurable experience using Canon cameras. Now that might not be the case for you or anyone you know. You might hate Canon cameras, your friend might love Canon cameras. It all comes down to personal preference and what you like using. Sometimes you have to compromise slightly and use the best tool for the job, and other times it's about having fun. This is the same reason that both Lamborghini and Toyota exist. They both essentially do the same thing, which is get you from point A to point B. Even though they come in drastically different price points, it doesn't necessarily make the one better than the other. For example, let's say you're moving into a new apartment and you've got a fridge and you've got a couch and you own a Lambo. You're stuck. You can't move your stuff from one apartment to the other. Even though that if you've got a Lambo, you can probably just buy a new fridge and buy a new couch for your apartment, that is beside the point. What we're talking about here is using the right tool for the right job. You could throw that stuff into the back of your pickup truck and drive it to your new apartment, and you'd be sorted, and it didn't cost you as much as if you owned a Lambo, and you could actually do it. So to make a decision about which camera to get, think about how your current camera kit is limiting you. Or if you don't have a camera kit, what features you need in a camera to create whatever you're going to be creating. Then go to the camera store or even rent the camera that you want to try out and see how you feel about it. If you like using it, if you don't like using it, try something else. And then in the end, pick the one whichever you prefer most. In the end, no one cares about what camera you're using, besides maybe other photographers and yourself, which is why you're watching this video and your clients aren't. A full frame camera doesn't make a professional photographer. If you're shooting for clients and you can produce high quality images regardless of what gear you're using, you're going to be doing all right. You, the person behind the camera, are more important than any gear you buy. Focus more and spend more time on improving your own skills. Focus on your composition, on your lighting and your exposure, and you'll see an improvement in your images. If you guys liked the video or found any of that information useful, don't forget to hit the like button, hit the subscribe button to see more videos like this and learn more stuff in the future. Maybe you can even improve your skills using the videos on this channel. And don't forget to follow me on Instagram. But as always, I shall see you guys in the next video. Cheers.